All right, you guys, welcome back to Little Man, Big Conversations. Man, speaking of big conversations, this is a big opportunity for me right now. This is a big compliment, and this is a big deal. All big. This man has been a part of the wrestling industry for almost 20, 21 years, I want to say. He is mostly known as the heart and soul of IPW. The man, the myth, legend. Ladies and gentlemen, I proudly bring to you today on Little Man Big Conversations, Cruz. Cruz, how are you, man?
Yeah, good, buddy. How you going?
Man, I'm just so super thrilled and stoked to speak to you and really happy that you've come aboard and just giving your time today, man. It really is awesome to have you on board today.
No worries, mate. Thanks for having me.
Now, do you prefer Cruz or can I use your real name?
You call me whatever you like, brother. I've been called worse either way.
All right, so if I slip between Cruz and Troy, that is the same person. For those playing the home game, sometimes us wrestlers, we switch between our worker names and our real names. So if you hear that name come up and we switch in between, hell, it is the same guy. So I've told this story on a couple of episodes of this podcast so far. And if you haven't heard them, I urge you to go and check out episode 1 and 2 of Little Man Big Conversations. But I reference the story of my first day technically in wrestling, where I did an impromptu dance-off with Shock Therapy, which is Violent Bill and Violent Bob, two comedy characters in IPW at that time. Now, to pull back the curtain, you were one of those guys.
Oh, I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, no, that was something that Maddie created back in the day, and it was a good chance for us to step away from anything too serious and just have a real good time. And obviously, there was two characters I played, Violent Bob and Cruz. And Cruz being such a serious character, it was nice to just let it down at times and jump into the Bob gear. So that's where we first met, buddy. Had a little dance.
Yeah. So I did an atrocious recreation of Michael Jackson's Billie Jean with my overinflated red jumper. But it was shortly after that the two things spiraled off from that night. One being that the commentator at the time, Grave Tavern, better known as Scott Black, ended up working with him at 31 Digital many years later. But the second thing, which relates to us, was that I was given a blue and black jersey that said WCW Australia on the front. And at that time, I thought, I didn't know the Ted Turner brand was here because I didn't know the history. But on the back, it said Cruz 01. And I thought, wow, this is awesome. I didn't know prizes were involved. Hell, it wasn't until 2 years later. And I want to be real clear. You're like, when people get to know you, you're a friendly, loyal, straight up kind of guy. Like, there is no frills. It's just what you see is what you get, which is awesome because a lot of people these days don't have that quality anymore. There's always an ulterior motive sometimes with people, but you're a straight shooter. You're a nice dude. To the people that are nice to you, I should specify.
Yes, very much so.
But back at that time, I was still sort of finding my own identity, not only in the wrestling world, but in life. So I was kind of reserved at that point because the people I had started with in wrestling had left. So I kind of knew Ash and obviously Hawk and Sweet Ass Matt because they were the trainers and obviously Hawk was the owner. But I didn't really know a lot of wrestlers at that point, specifically you, because much when I started there, I was doing a university degree at the time, which was based in media. And the topic was raised of possibly having the Major Impact 2, 3, and 4 converted from VHS to DVD. So when that opportunity came up, I said, I'm doing media at the moment. I can definitely do this for you. And that's when I first got the tapes of seeing the guys like yourself starting so early on in what was then known as Major Impact Wrestling. But before that was WCW Australia.
Yep.
So I knew of you before I had even met you. So I remember there was a time. Now, you may not remember this, but this has always burnt into my mind because this is technically the first conversation, in inverted commas, that I remember having with you. We were doing shows out of the training facility, and there happened to be a lumberjack match happening at the time. But the locker room was empty, and it just so happened that it was only you and me in that little locker room. And I thought, hey, if there ever was a time to sort of break the ice and talk to Cruz, this would be an opportune time, because I don't know when I'm going to have the chance to talk to this guy one-on-one. It's I didn't know what to say. I was intimidated, but in the best way, in a very professional way. I was like, wow, there he is. That's Cruz. I've seen so many matches. So I remember you were fiddling with the mask. You were sort of sitting there, and I guess you were just drumming through ideas of what was going to come up in the match coming up. And I said to you, hey, man, I've always wondered, what is your mask made of? And you said, oh, yeah, here you go. And you threw it at me. And I caught it, and I looked at it, and I had a feel around, and I think it was lycra and mesh. And I said, oh, cool.
I think it was Broken Dreams it was made of, but yeah.
And tears of former enemies.
Yeah.
And so I looked at it, and I went, I said, oh, cool. Thanks so much, man. And I handed it back to you, and I that's literally as far as it went. I thought, okay, I've kind of chatted to him in a way. I've maybe broken the ice there. I don't know. I didn't know what else to bring up, because I didn't know you, but I did wonder, hey, that mask is very different from the stock standard Lucha Libre Mexican wrestling masks that were out there at that time. And I thought, okay, cool. I've finally spoken to him. That's awesome. And I remember you then said, oi. And I turned around, and you threw the mask back at me, and you said, you can go out there and wear it if you want. And I went, what? And you went, yeah, I got another one. Doesn't matter. Now, that may have not have been a huge deal to you, but the mask you threw me was your original silver and black mask that you had worn during the start of your career.
Yeah. So as you look at that.
That was like, to me at that point, that was like being given Ali's boxing glove. Like, that was like, oh, wow, this is like, even though it's just, I mean, at the end of the day, people out there, it's like, yeah, it's just a mask. No, this had history to it. And and then being told, hey, you go out there and wear my mask. Do you remember? I mean, I've just run you through it now, but do you remember being in that situation with me?
Yeah, I'm actually, I mean, when you said it, I remember the situation, or of it happening, obviously, not in specific detail, but I do remember doing that. And yeah, look, I mean, at the end of the day, to me, I mean, I've wrestled for a long time, and I've done a lot of things, and the mask, like wrestling, to me was just, I guess, I don't know, it's just something you do, and I probably don't think of it myself as having that much meaning in that regard, but it's just because it was just part of what I did. And like you say, it's a mask, but when you say it like that, yeah, I suppose it is it's a big thing, and it's a big little a stepping stone, I suppose, into what we became down the track. So
yes,
it is cool. It's cool when you think of it that way.
It really was, man. Like that's a shoot. I'm not hyping it up just because I'm interviewing, man. That's honestly how I felt. But I don't know if I've ever told you this story, because I sat there, and I was my hands were quivering, and I put the mask on, and I remember sitting there in this mask going, this is nuts. It was like putting on a VR headset or something for the first time and experiencing virtual reality. I'm like, this is weird. And I remember walking out there, and I remember seeing Hawk in that famous chair that he always used to sit in for every time he did speeches or anything business related. He had that chair. Yeah. And I came out with that mask, and the look of horror and confusion on his face, to which he then said,
"Cruz has shrunk. What was going on?"
To which he then said, "What the fuck are you doing wearing that?"
Honey, I shrunk the Cruz. Yeah.
Like I'd run into your bag and gone, "Tee, I'm going to wear his mask." And so I remember doing that match, and coming backstage and taking it off, and you being like, "All right, bloke, how was that?" And I went, "That was different." And then I went to give it back to you, and I
see a thing.
Yeah. I blacked out. So I remember giving that mask back to you, and that's when you said, "No, you keep it. I got another one." And I went, "Really?" And you went, "Yeah, nice." And then that's when, as you just touched on just before, that's when the whole mini cruise idea came about, because you said, "Yeah, come out with me for this one. You mean you've already worn it? Might as well." So I remembered wearing, I think, a leather jacket at the time, and I zipped it up, and I came out, and there we were. And and then it wasn't until, I think we were doing weekly shows back then, but it wasn't until the next week where I had found and brought that original black and blue jersey that I had gotten from that dance off 2 years prior. I brought it out, had your original mask, found some track pants that looked similar to yours, bought some fight shoes because, hey, I'm not going to be wearing sneakers next to this guy. And
Yeah, you better not.
yeah, and then do you remember what happened next when I pulled out that jersey?
Nah.
So I pulled out that jersey and I said, hey, look what I found. And you went, what the fuck? Where did you find that? And I went, and I went, 2 years ago, man, when I did that dance off, you gave me this as a prize for winning, I guess that moment. And you went, oh, did I? And I went, yeah, man, I've always kept this in high regard. And you went, so can I have it back?
It was comfortable, man. It was a lot cooler to wear than the one I wear now or wore.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that was the original jersey. I remember, the lady that made that for me when I very first started wrestling. Yeah, she used to make some stuff for the shop and that, and yeah, that was a comfy jersey to wear.
And I'm still growing into it. I think I'll take to that jersey, but
I'm probably too fat for it by then anyway.
But yeah, no, I've always kept that jersey in high regard, and then
Thanks,
yeah,
buddy.
and then to be able to work with you, man. Again, just given that history that I had seen, and now to be a miniature version of you, there was a spin-off there for a while. I think work and life were picking up for you. You weren't able to do as many shows as on a consistent basis as you were doing prior. But I remember there was a stint there where I did the mini Cruz angle, and for a while there, I just came out as pretty much a miniature version of Cruz, swearing and intensity and kicking people in the head and doing all sorts of things Cruz would. And it was very much hey, who put this guy in the
Cruz
wash?
never swore. What are you talking about?
Oh man,
How dare you say that? Unless it was Trocadero, of course. But yeah.
Oh, there was one show when you came out to the entrance and you were fired up and you're ready to go, and you came out of that entrance, and I'll never forget this turn of phrase because it was hilarious. You yelled at the crowd. I don't know if you remember this. It was probably off the cuff. You were in the moment. You come out for the entrance. You were beating your chest, doing the classic entrance, and then you were slapping the desk to get people to make noise. And I was following you, and you said, "Come on, you guys, make some noise, or I'll rip your effing dicks off."
Oh man, that's why I never got picked up by the WWE, you know.
And I just remember thinking, man, I'm so happy I'm in a mask because I was laughing my ass off in that mask, man. So yeah, we had the stint there where I was doing the singles run as Muze. Was where each time you came back, there were certain important matches that that Muze was sort of came out with you, but wasn't at ringside. But the majority of the time, most of the matches during that time, at least, I was around. I'd left the company in 2013, and I'd come back sporadically to see shows. We would shake hands. I'd see her out and about in the real world as well. But it wasn't until I think 2019 when we started to get the band back together, as it would.
Yeah, that was good. Yes, nice to get back in there and have a bit of fun again. And I guess it's like a little family, I guess, when we're out there, and a little team.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm always so focused when I'm in the ring on, not only what's going on in the match, but the crowd. And it's nice, I think, to have, yourself outside there to, join it all together, I suppose, to make sure it's a bit of a flow.
Yeah.
You do good.
You did good. All right, I'll never do it again. So that's how we know each other. So we've had that history, working alongside you now for many years as a miniature version of Cruz. But take it back for me, because if we're going to pull the curtain back, Hawk wasn't only the trainer to you, was he? He was much more than that.
Yeah, no, he was my dad, obviously, and my best mate. I couldn't, as much as I miss him now, and I hate that he's gone. I couldn't have had a better father and a better mentor and a better friend, So he was a lot. But man, we had some good times, and hell, even if it was putting the sign up back in the day, back in an hour at the shop and then coming back 6 hours later because we'd been up at Sharks half the day. There was a lot of cool things we got to experience together. But no, he was a huge factor in my life. I mean, my mother obviously as well, but
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time under my dad's wing. Good and bad times, but it was always for a better purpose. And it was nice. He was a lot.
So take me back to those classic times, because you weren't always up here in Queensland, were you? Were you traveling around with Hawk at the time before you came here, or how did it all begin for you? Where did it all start?
So how I started, so we used to have a shop in Ashmore, and back at the time when Dad was running the wrestling. And I believe there was a show coming up at the Ashmore PCYC, and I had trained for years. Like, I never wanted to wrestle.
Okay.
It was never something I wanted to do, but I always enjoyed learning to wrestle. So because he was some would say otherwise, but I always felt he was a very good teacher and pushing the basics. So I always had a very strong grounding of the basics: how to fall, how to hold. And the in-between things that make a good match. So I knew how to wrestle. And I guess coming from that background, it might have been planted into me and, subconsciously, who knows. So there was a situation that popped up where he needed a wrestler on a show, and he put it to me. And reluctantly, I took the match.
Right.
But and I think as it turned out, it was with Canadian Wolf, who turned out to be a very dear friend and still is to this day, even though he's in Canada now. But he told me all these stories of back in the old days when he would do matches, and people back then, not that wrestling was necessarily any different, but it was perceived very differently. I feel to some extent it was probably better in those days, not because of what was done in the ring, but the way it was done.
Right.
Obviously not as flamboyant and as flippy and flashy, but it was, those matches were put together very well in an entertaining manner. But that aside, he would tell me how, because people would live it so strongly, he had situations where people would come back after the show because he had worked them so bad as a heel. They'd come back with a gun, threaten to shoot him, or break their windows and all this sort of stuff. And I'm thinking, oh, it's true, So we had a shop just around the corner from the venue, and I thought, geez, I'm going to go out there and work a heel angle. So I need a mask, because I don't want these guys recognizing where our business is, and then putting a rock through the window, because
right, because it was taken that seriously back then.
Yeah, back then, and I didn't, I can't say firsthand, but every old school wrestler that you talk to will tell you that the way they ran wrestling back then, they would fly separately. If they saw each other in the street, they would literally almost go to blows, because they wanted to maintain that belief of the reality of wrestling and what went on in those rings. Whereas now it's very transparent and accepted as a show.
Mm-hmm.
So with that knowledge of what happened in the past, it was like, okay, I've got to throw a mask on and do this match, So that's how I sort of got to start wrestling, and then eventually doing the match with Canadian Wolf, with Scotty.
Right.
That's how all that came about.
So you mentioned that you didn't really want to do the wrestling side of things in terms of live events. Was that because of Hawk's established career at that point? And you wanted to do your own thing, or you just never?
Had absolutely nothing to do with that. I've never historically been a theatrical person.
Right.
There's always been no bullshit about me. Like you say, what you say is what you get. Very WYSIWYG. So getting my head around the acting, so to speak, in wrestling, taking, the physicality out of it, but the actual theatrical side of it, I couldn't get my head around wanting to do that. But obviously I succumbed to it because I wanted to help him out. So it had absolutely nothing to do with anything other than that, why I didn't potentially want to do it. So that was purely it, to be honest.
do you remember the conversation being brought up because Hawk was originally from New Zealand and he flew over here to Queensland. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, originally, Dad being from New Zealand, he actually flew over here, and then he started working. I think he was doing roof tiling or something back in the day.
Okay.
It's funny, like all the time that Dad and I spent together in during his life, I suppose, me still being around, but we didn't really talk a lot about the past. And I don't know if that was because we lived in the present very much, like we were always busy and we were always enjoying each other's company. And yes, there were stories, but it's one thing that, when I guess we had Dad's memorial after he passed, that there was so many things that I learnt back then, even just seeing some of those photos. So in terms of why he originally came over here and when he was, I believe it was Frankston in Melbourne is where he did a lot of his work. As a toddler. And then in a wrestling context, after we had moved over here and then gone through, different businesses as such, ups and downs, he eventually started the wrestling himself. I think it might have even been with Noel Oliver, and had a lot of the old school guys like, Louis the Butcher and Dominic Bianco and, Mario Milano and,
wow. Okay. That's an esteemed class of guys.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Sort of growing up with them. Like some of those guys, it was just amazing to be around. And that's when I guess you talk about these days the newer, I guess, the way people interact is very different to them. And I don't know if it's an age thing or if it's a cultural thing or God knows. But yeah, that's when growing up with those guys was amazing in the wrestling, and you learnt a lot from them. And I guess that's, with Dad as well, why I, sort of wrestle the way I do as a result of that, and why I think my perception of wrestling is very different than other people, I suppose.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. Being that you're around not only your dad, but all those guys at that time, that, your perception of wrestling would lean towards that because that is what you knew, that it was what you were exposed to, and hey, that's how the business was. Speaking of the business, do you remember, was there a time at let's say, the proverbial family dinner table where Hawk came up with the idea, or was there ever a conversation of, hey, I'm going to move from Melbourne to Queensland, I'm going to start WCW Australia? Do you remember if there was something like that? Was that ever brought up, or was that just a case of...
No, not at all. So basically the Melbourne side of things, I believe, was pre-me, when he was younger. So then when we moved over here as a family, dynamic was more, I think I was about 5 years old. We moved over here to Burleigh Heads. So there was not any wrestling involved in that conversation back then other than what he had done in New Zealand. And obviously over here when he was wrestling full time. So, there was that conversation in terms of transitioning from south to north. No, certainly not. The conversations I remember, I suppose, to some extent, and broken conversations were more involved in, doing the shows back then when, the other guys were around, and then even sort of moving through those shows through Bean Lee and all that sort of area. They're more the conversations in terms of early days of wrestling with me.
Right. Okay. So it was already a up and running thing by the time that you can remember. Like there wasn't a prelude.
Exactly. Yeah.
It was just it was already happening.
Early day memories, other than going to the shows, helping set up.
Right. Okay.
Back before and this is probably when I was, I think I started wrestling maybe, I don't know if my actual match was around sort of 17, 18, maybe 18 or so, I think, when I first wrestled.
Okay.
A long time ago.
Yeah.
But before that, it was more in a supporting role of just helping with the shows and seeing the shows and, all that before I actually wrestled. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So as far as you were aware, coming up as a kid, going through the whole schooling thing, hey, this was just business as usual. Just my dad runs a wrestling company.
100%, mate. Yeah. Everyone at school knows Troy's dad's a wrestler. You grew up running a caravan park. He'd literally body slam someone through a fence once. That was pretty fun.
Oh, Jesus.
He wasn't a good tenant apparently.
Clearly, yeah.
So yeah, so he ran a pretty tight ship like that. But no, it was actually more my younger childhood was growing up with your dad as a wrestler. Don't mess with Troy's dad. You know, and even for me, it was like, don't do the wrong thing, not because he was abusive or whatever, but because of the fact that, you know, he might actually kill me one day. There was no, just to be clear, there was no indication that was going to be an option. But, you know, hence probably why I never drank. Yeah, and to this day, I've never drunk, because I grew up respecting him, I guess, as a person and as a strong person, and also growing up around environments where I saw, you know, drunks and, you know, druggies and all that sort of scenario. So that sort of stemmed on. So that's why that was my earlier memories of dad and wrestling, and people around me knowing me and my dad as a wrestler.
Right. Was that kind of like a celebrity kind of vibe during the schooling days of being like, oh, you know, is the wrestling show, his dad's a wrestler? Was that?
Yeah. When I think back about it a little bit now, it certainly was a bit of a status. Yeah. I remember a story once. A really good friend of mine back in the day, his name's Brett Winks. We used to, you know, we were in film and TV together, and we'd make little shows and all this sort of stuff. But we came home from going out one night, and, you know, I used to go out a lot and go dance, and the non-alcoholic dancer, some lunatic looking himself in the mirror all freaking night. Dead set, unbelievable. I'd slap myself these days, but hey, that's what I did. But we come home, and old Brady's throwing up outside the side of the maxi taxi, which I'm sure a million of you have already experienced that before. But then we get home, and we were living in Labrador at the time, and we come home early hours of the morning. I'm like, all right, mate, come inside. You know, and he's like, nah. He says, I don't want to come inside, because if I throw up in your house, your dad is going to murder me. So it was like, you know, like, I guess status like that. And coincidentally, he slept outside. I came outside to find him, and he turned out asleep in the back of the neighbour's car.
Wow.
So we later found his watch in the car and got it back to him. So that's got nothing to do with the story, but kind of
that was the
vibe. No, so that's the sort of status, I suppose, more with my father. Yeah, it was that he was respected in terms of his strength and his I guess he had a status like that. Yep.
Right. So given that status and given that sort of schooling vibe, if you will, was there any of your schoolmates that ended up joining the wrestling because of this?
No.
No one you went to school with went, hey, I want to give this a shot, or was it just we respect?
No, not that I can remember.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, keeping in mind I've been hit in the head a few times, so my memory's not always great. But no, buddy, I don't think there was.
Okay.
And or any type of association. I'm just even wondering if there was anyone. No, there wasn't. There was you know, people that I'd sort of met during my life, you know, that had jumped in and joined wrestling in one way or another, or learnt to wrestle, or you know, wanted to be a manager or something like that, but no one directly from my schooling days. No.
Okay. So you've got the schooling status, you've got, you know, hey, don't mess with the Hawk. I don't want to throw up in your house, that kind of vibe. And so I imagine now you've graduated high school, you're doing the training. Hawk says to you, hey, need you to fill in. You get the mask. Now, was it the mask that you had made, your original one, or were you using something else at the time?
No, I had that mask made from scratch, and I think so. Back then, you know, the Cruz character was like ice hockey based.
Okay.
You know, along the lines of, you know, he's been banned from the ice hockey leagues. Yada yada yada. Everyone needs a backstory. You know, and remembering back then, the characterization of our wrestlers was a lot like the old school days. You know, there was some really corny names.
Yeah.
You know, the Gravedigger. You know, okay. You know, and Thor and all these things that were dead set like superhero names, or you know, good versus evil, which was how it always was. So, you know, I come along, I'm an ice hockey character, which is, I guess, you know, people used to say Jason Voorhees because I'd give away those plastic masks as I'd come out and sign them for the kids and things. Yeah, that was, I don't know how. Yeah, it's interesting when you think back about how all that happened. So, yeah, buddy, just thought I'd jump in the mask, and that way the face is hidden and no windows were broken during the making of this movie.
So were you an ice hockey fan? Is that where it stemmed from?
Can't remember. I really can't remember, Flash. Yeah,
just the goalie, just the image of the goalie in the mask.
Yeah, I guess it was just like, I'm just trying to think. I'm trying to think back to where that. I don't know if it was. You know what I think it might have been. I feel like it could have been that I saw those masks, and then I thought, well, let's make a lycra version of that.
Right. You know? Okay. Something more intimidating.
I don't think it had anything to do with the shop we had at the time. I'm pretty sure that, because there wasn't like a gag in it or anything like that. But
yeah, we've had a few guys on here that have name dropped that Hawk was running a sex shop at that time. Yeah.
Oh yeah. It's just funny story on that. I don't know if you ever knew, but I used to run a personal training center at the back of that shop, and imagining the walls didn't go all the way to the roof. So you imagine some bugger coming in to get his toys, and here's some other bugger at the back grunting on the back of a bench press, thinking, "What is going on in this place?" But that's another story. But no, colourful upbringing. Yeah, no, mate. I can only imagine that that's where that mask originated from. Was an extension of that plastic mask that I looked at, which I think I found in a dollar shop.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Maddie used to find a lot of masks, and I don't think it would have been him that found it. Who knows? He may have even found it, knowing him. But he used to do it. He used to love shopping for gear in those dollar shops and that. But I think, I'm pretty sure that's where it came from. So
you've had the mask designed, you've got the jersey printed. How did the name come about? Where'd that name stem from?
Ali asked me that a lot, actually. It came from, I used to, for whatever reason, love writing Santa Cruz. It was just this thing. And, I wonder if I used to have a Commodore 64 back in the day.
Yeah.
Load those tapes until they failed, and then I used to piss me right off. But some of those, there was like a game on there that had surfing and skateboarding or something like that. And I feel like that was on there.
Okay.
To be honest, I'm clutching. I think that's where it came from. And they used to write it down. I even burnt it on used to make like a wooden pencil case at school in one of my classes. I'm pretty sure I etched it onto that. And maybe I just, I can't be Santa, so I might as well be Cruz, So maybe that's where it came from. Easy to write.
Yeah.
Good choice. Pretty easy to sign.
Yeah. You take the typo it.
I feel like he could have come up with something shorter. Mo, maybe. I don't know. But yeah, so that's where that came from, the name.
Right. Yeah. So you've got the name now, you've got the image that you like, you have your debut match.
Yep.
How did you feel after doing that match? Was it still like, I did this as a favor to my dad? Or were you starting to think, hey, I didn't mind that?
I loved it. No, I loved it. I'll tell you the one big thing, and you know how I am with wrestling, and this will make sense to you when I say it. But that match, my dad always said to me, you don't plan anything. You da-da-da-da. And, when you just start wrestling, you're like, okay, all right, no worries. But I feel like I have to, so I know what I'm doing. So anyway, that match with Scotty was planned from start to finish. Every single thing you could think of, and God knows how I remembered everything. So we planned it start to finish, and I just remember doing the match thinking, Jesus, I'm thinking about this so much. What am I doing next? What am I doing next? And if there's one thing it taught me, it was don't plan the match, because you really pigeonhole what you can do out there. It's and that's, I guess, why that'll make sense to you. Cruz, you want to do this? Yeah, this is how we're going to do a net breaker. We're going to turn it 16 times. You remember that one, Flat?
Yeah, I remember.
No, yeah, that was the big thing that came out. Not anything to do with not wanting to wrestle, because I actually really enjoyed it. Okay. But I remember, no, after this, I'm not planning a thing. And yeah, that's
okay. So you've got the itch, you've got the proverbial bug, the undie skin, you've got that stretch now, you've got the noise of the crowd, you're starting to feel the vibe, you're thinking, hey, I could probably dig this. How long was it then? What year are we in it now? Is this the origins still of WCW Australia, like 99, 2000? Is this where we were at this point?
Yeah, I reckon, yeah, so like I said, I reckon I was about 18.
Okay.
And I'm now 40, one or two. I can't remember. I always forget how old I am. But so that was very early days of WCW Australia.
Right. Okay.
I had hair, so
Yeah.
which is inconvenient under a mask. But yeah, it's that's a long time ago, and
Yeah.
there's a real big void in my memory as to what happened soon after that. I guess we're sort of talking. Yeah, it's sort of WCW Australia, start wrestling with guys like Tripper and Jesus, Davey Boy and all those sorts of guys, I suppose, start popping up.
Mhm.
Soon around that time. BJ, yada, yada, yada. I
Yeah.
don't think BJ on that show. I think he was post that. So,
Okay.
yeah,
So you
Origins.
so you start operating, because this was operating around, I want to say, was it the Southport Stadium at this point? Were they doing shows there?
So that show was at Ashmore PCYC, first
Right.
show.
Yep. Okay.
So I feel like it would have been soon after that we would have moved over to, the Southport Basketball Stadium. Don't know if it was weekly shows back then, but yeah, that's where we moved to after that. Yeah.
All right. So you're doing the shows out of Southport now. At this stage, the company's starting to get a bit of a following. Not so much a cult following, but it's getting a mass influx. And then this is when the training picks up. You get guys coming in like BJ Blade. You get guys coming in like Jethro. You get guys coming in like Ash and Sweetass and guys of that nature who are starting to, I guess, learn the fundamentals that you had already been exposed to at such a young age. What was your role during this time with this influx? Were you still doing the training role and helping out the guys, or were you just now transitioning over to not only helping the live events, but were you just doing the performing at this point, or were you still being a jack of all trades at that time?
Yeah, it was a bit of a jack of all trades. So obviously, involved in running the show with Dad, and then there was a bit of training, just sort of taking people, how to fall, basic holds, things like that, things that are very, very important with the basis of professional wrestling. So I was more involved in that sort of thing, and then you got guys like BJ that come along who, BJ for example had a strong amateur wrestling background, or a strong base at least, so he had a very good grounding from the start. So I guess it was about then working with other guys who could assist in ways.
Yep.
So with BJ, for argument's sake, he would come along and he would, hit a good knowledge of how to do holds, which at the end of the day, amateur wrestling is a base for professional wrestling. Collar and tie lockups, arm bars, suplexes, falling, all of that. So I would work in with Dad and guys like BJ and other guys back then. Geez, I can't even remember who might have been helping with the teaching back then. But yeah, to assist in developing wrestlers and running the shows. And also behind the scenes, I was editing shows as well. So there was quite a bit that went on outside of that base at Ashmore, which was, I think the area we used back then was the aerobic floor for the little gym I was running back then. So,
Wow.
it was a little drop together wood ring that we would put together.
Yep.
And use. I think sprung some tires in the middle back then, and then became a bit more of a permanent fixture before we actually put the other ring in there. But yeah, that was cool.
So you're doing more of a jack of all trades thing. You're helping out with the training, you're helping out with the live shows. You're also performing as well. How long was it now, being that you're the boss's son? So there was always that weird stigma with wrestling where it's like family members and things like that. There is that nature in the business where it's like, oh, he's getting this because he's related to that person, things like that. Did you ever encounter that at all, or was that a thing that sort of just didn't exist?
Oh no, you got it, because there'd be things, like, oh, there's a strap being put on Cruz, but Dad would always say very much, and to me behind scenes, that there's not going to be favoritism. I had to earn things. Obviously, he respected me with my ability, what I could do, but there was never favoritism in that regard. At the end of the day, Dad would reward who put in effort, who put in work, who deserved it, not only always as a wrestler, but with effort. You can get guys that are great wrestlers, but they're dickheads, who put in very little effort. And then there's guys that will put in a lot of effort. They're great wrestlers as well. So there was always that little bit of thing going on behind the scenes. Look, ultimately, I'm not a great instructor because I don't have patience. As you know, my patience. I like to help people, but I don't have a lot of patience. I'm not a great coach. I'm very OCD with things, and if something doesn't get done right enough times, I'm just like, okay, I can't do it. Dad, the opposite. He would just persist and work with people and give everyone an opportunity.
He was very much a devil in the detail kind of guy.
Yeah, very much so. And sometimes, people wouldn't probably understand that, because you could have guys out there that could do all the fancy shit in the world, but couldn't put an arm bar on and make it look good, or couldn't throw a hit and make it look good. I could name you, and I won't who, but a lot of guys that were respected as good wrestlers, but when I watch them and I watch the details, I go, Jesus, that does my head in. And please stop rating yourself, because anyone can learn how to do a flip or a big bump or something like that. But those little fine details in between, you're horrible at. So, stop rating yourself so much. So that's where Dad was. He would, in his own way, with his old school backing, there was certain things that he really felt were important. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying he was perfect in any regards as a professional wrestler. I mean, we've all got our strengths and our weaknesses. But he would very much pay attention to things that he thought were important to learn. If you go into a wrestling ring to learn how to be a professional wrestler and you spend 2 hours in there doing fitness, you're learning nothing. You can go home and do that. You can condition yourself anywhere. So where, he would come in and say, I want to see you put that arm bar on. I want to see you put that on strong, and I want to see you sell it. And if you don't sell it, well, you know what came next. So yeah, that's where it was important for him with the details. And I guess then flying on to me, while I struggled to be a coach, because I was worse with those details. I really wanted them to look strong, and I couldn't deal with it when I was seeing it not happening repetitively. But he would just hang in there and really teach those details strongly.
Yeah, and he was very profound in that way, where he didn't so much adhere to the fitness side of things. That was very much a, hey, do you do that on your own time? I'm here to teach you how to wrestle. That's why we're here. But yeah, one of the key things I first remember upon not only meeting Hawk, but training with the likes of him, not only him, but I think Ash and Sweetass at the time were the two main trainers. He was very much, you monkey see, monkey do with training a lot. Do this way. This is how it is. This is where you need to stand. You need to hold this in a certain regard, especially with holds. And he would get in and he would say, all right, do you understand why you're doing this the way you're doing it? And a lot of the time guys would go, no. And he would then demonstrate. He'd grab someone at ringside and he would demonstrate doing that move with them. Then he would say, do you see the difference in what you're doing and what I'm doing? And a lot of the times the guys would go, well, no. And he goes, I'm feeling it. I'm living in this moment. I'm feeling what's happening to me. I'm telling this person, this person has got me. I'm showcasing to everyone here, I'm in trouble. He goes, but with you're just doing the movement, and there's a difference. And he would always say, in order to feel what you're doing, you need to understand first why you're doing that move. When you understand the move that you're doing, then the emotion comes through, because your body language feels confident enough to go, okay, I know where I'm at. Now I can sort of demonstrate the story to the audience. And I always remember that he was very profound at and definitely hammering almost of that nature to a lot of the guys, especially myself when I was starting out, because of my frame. He would always say, hey, you got to do this thing this way, because if you do it this way that I've been showing these guys, it's not going to work for you. So he was able to switch it up and apply what was going on with me to equal or to equivalent to my size. But I do remember you coming in, and this was, I think, maybe very early on in my career, which was 2002, 2008, 2009. I do remember you coming in as a coach one time because I think the other two trainers just didn't happen to be there or something. Something had happened that they both couldn't be there, and yeah, you as a favor, much like many moons before, coming in and doing that first show as a favor, would now come in and went, all right, cool, I'll run it. And man, yeah, your coaching was very much, we're doing this and don't F about. And we get to it, we do it. And there were guys there that would, I don't think it was obviously meant as a way of like laughing as in terms of like obviously insulting someone of the likes of yourself. But I think a lot of those guys, because of the intimidating nature and the presence, and a lot of them didn't have the conversation. Like even me at that point, I hadn't had that moment with you in that locker room with that mask. So a lot of guys knew you from the live show, sharing the locker room, but hey, giving that man some space. But when you came in to be a trainer, a lot of those guys had those sort of like awkward, social, anxious laughs.
Yeah.
Which just happened to come about at the same time where the frustration was starting to get to you, to which you then hear, ha ha ha, which was like, oh man, would you like some gasoline from this fire that you have now lit? Because you're not helping the situation. But I always remember your training session, and I never told you this story, and I don't think I've ever mentioned it on this podcast prior, but we did a drill after we did the initial running through of, seeing where everyone's levels are at, doing the bumps, doing the holds. Okay, you're at this level, you're at that level. Can you do a slam? You're 4'10". We'll try anyway. Okay, we'll adjust. But after that whole run-of-the-mill training that you put us through, at the end we said, all right, cool, let's do some matches here. We got a show. I think it was still monthly shows at that point. And you said, all right, let's put some matches together. And you put me in with a guy of equal size. I can't remember who.
Smurf, was he a Smurf?
Yeah, he was.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry, I'm just going to call FU. Do you know that number? But yeah, I remember we did that training, and you told me to, like, I did the match, and I thought, of course, being all of what, maybe 6 months in, I'm obviously riding my high horse. I've been doing a match in front of Cruz. This is already intimidating as hell. I'm going to give it my all. But I remember the feedback you gave me was, hey, mate, yeah, look, all I'm going to say to you is just slow down.
Yeah.
And I went, and I remember, and I've never told you this, and I remember sort of frowning at you, being like, what? I felt like I went slow. And you went, no, don't frown. He goes, because you're going to listen to me. If you think you're going slow, if you're in there and you think you're going slow, go even slower.
Yeah, halve it. Yeah, it's one of the big things is that, and I don't know if it's just, I don't know what it is that makes you feel like they're going fast. It might even be adrenaline, but that's one thing. So if you're going 1,000,000 miles an hour, everything's going to be sloppy.
Yeah.
You're going to, and what you need to try and do is you need to make things, look real and how it would be, However, you need it to be smooth. Now, once you start rushing around the ring and reaching and grabbing, that's when things, start buggering up, Unless your fitness level and your knowledge is, sublime, then you're going to screw it up. And that's where you will notice, some of the better independent wrestlers in the US, they have the fitness levels and the knowledge and the synchronicity to make that continue to flow, even though they're going 1,000,000 miles an hour. Then you get guys here, for argument's sake, that really try and overdo it in maybe a lucha fashion, or it's just too much. And then it just, as you start to gas, or you start to become sloppy, and then it just all goes to shit. Whereas if you are just cool, calm, and collected, you be methodical with what you do, then everything you do is going to look right. But once you start going out there and going 1,000,000 miles an hour, you're going to be reaching wrong. Everyone's losing their balance. Your hits are going to look awful, and it's all going to go to pus. And that's what you're trying to avoid.
Yeah. But I understand all that now. Many years later, 12 years later, I'm like, yeah, I get it. But back then, I was like, oh, did I screw up? I don't know what's going on. How slow does he want me to go? Okay. And I remember like something. I think the next training session where I was running the ropes, and I think I took it literally. So I hit the ropes and I started slowly running, not to be a dick, but I was like, oh, I'm going too fast. Like, that's how I took it, because I'm like, I can't. Yeah. But no, I understand it all now. But hey, I always remember that training session, and to completely completely tell
Yeah,
the
you
story that.
refresh my memory there now. We used to do a lot of drills on that back then, didn't we, to try and simulate situations in the ring and hitting ropes and taking bumps and things. So
Yeah,
good call,
yeah.
Flash.
Oh, thanks,
Thanks
buddy.
for the memories.
You're right. See ya. So all right. So you're doing the jack of all trades. You've had a few shows under your belt. Do you remember how long it was into your career now that hey, the topic comes up of hey, we're going to put a championship or a title on you? Do you remember how long you were in your career at this point?
No. No, I got no idea, to be honest.
Okay, moving on. No.
I feel, was it the high risk championship that I did or something like that? I think, I don't know if it was the whatever we were, the WCW or MIW back then whenever I got the strap, but I feel like potentially the first title I might have won would have been what they called the high risk back then because I was a bit flippy, younger and flippy, which these days I guess what I did back then is just stock standard for anyone who's 140 kilos or less. But yeah, no, I don't, mate. I got no idea. I'm sorry, Flash. I should remember these things, shouldn't I?
No, it's all right, man. I
remember what I had for breakfast this morning. It was
okay,
like a
cool.
smoothie.
Your smoothie coaster is the belt. Oh, here it is.
Yeah, there it is.
Yeah, because so you did have your first championship. That was a thing that happened. There was that kind of vibe, no matter what. Hey, the boss's son. But you're right. Pete will always say this is not because of favoritism. This is not flavor of the month. This is definitely not because you're my son. This is because you are working hard. The crowd's resonating with you, and hey, it's time to switch it up.
With the crowd, yeah. Now that I think about it, I know the crowd used to pop for me a bit back then, and to be honest, I think it had a lot to do with the mask. The mask looked really cool. I think it's probably 90% of why I was popular back then. Sure, I could wrestle. I look back at tapes now. Well, I have looked back at tapes, and I can see so many flaws of things I've done, but I really think, that the crowd were reacting to the character. Character was cool. And I think he just thought, well, the crowd are eating you up, so let's put a belt on you. Because at the end of the day, I guess you try and not give the crowd what they want, and you try and give the crowd what they want. That's sort of that balance. And I think back then, a combination of I could wrestle, and the crowd were enjoying what I was doing. So let's put a belt on me, and that's where it started, I think.
Right. Okay. So how long into this new journey into the wrestling world, into having your first championship, do you remember how long it was when the transitional period came of, hey, we've had this WCW thing for a while, WCW Australia, no relation to the Ted Turner brand, but hey, we've got this, but now we're going to switch it up and call it Major Impact Wrestling. Do you remember how this all came about?
No, look, I think Dad came up with the brand, I believe. I do remember, sitting down with a guy in in front of the computer designing the logo with the fist coming through, breaking. That was all pretty cool. I actually really liked that logo. I wish I got no idea where the copy of that is. I'd probably make myself a shirt, but put my name on it. Cruz or Santa, one of those. I don't remember exactly when it transitioned. I know it was sort of, again, back in the day when we had the shop, over on the other side there. But I don't know how it came about. I think Dad just wanted to go away from that WCW brand and give it a little bit more of an independence. Because even though, back in the day, I guess WCW Australia, the beauty of that was, you could be called WCW Australia, even having no affiliation with the Ted Turner World Championship Wrestling. But it gave it something to ride on the back of, and bring it through and gain interest and get people to show. Because at the end of the day, if people think they're going to, whether you tell them you are or not, but whether they think that they're coming to an American extension company, then they're going to be maybe thinking, we'll go to that. It gives a little bit more validity. But by then we sort of had, I guess, momentum, and it was time to distance ourselves from that branding and create Major Impact Wrestling. So I think that's how it all came about. The exact timeline, no. I really can't remember exactly when it was.
Right.
I just remember sitting there with the fellow with Glenn doing that logo, which looked pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, as I'm interviewing you right now, I'm sitting here, like I mentioned earlier on. I kind of, I guess, followed in your footsteps in a certain way, because I did help out with a lot of the production down at IPW for a stint there. And as I mentioned earlier, when I was doing that university degree, I was given the old Major Impact Show tapes that were there at the time. And I'm sitting here right now looking at that logo at the DVD covers that I'd made from the original VHS of Major Impact 2, 3, and 4. And they feature the fist breaking through, saying the Major Impact. And the one thing I want to bring up is that Major Impact 3 still lists a lot of the championships at that time, the WCW championship. So it must have come after the Major Impact 3 show?
Could have been, mate. Yeah. It was because I think Major Impact wasn't the branding, or wasn't the title of the company. It was Major Impact were those shows, obviously, like you say. They were our pay-per-views, so to speak. So you're right. Yeah, I think what happened was there was a transition from World Championship Wrestling presents Major Impact 1, 3, or 4 to Major Impact becoming the brand of the company.
Right. So what could have been the idea of, hey, these shows we're doing, it's sort of like a super show. Let's just call our brand after the shows and make every show a super show kind of vibe.
Yeah, correct, mate. I think not so much making them a super show kind of vibe, but it was just like Major Impact Wrestling sounds like a great name for a company. That we'd created that logo, that branding, so to speak. Let's make that the brand of the company. And I think it all made sense, put all that together. So, it must have been not long after that. How many did we go through? 4? Was it 4 Major Impact?
Yeah. I mean, I've only got the tapes of 2, 3, and 4. So I've got 2, 3 lists you versus Sweet-Ass for what was then the WCW South Pacific Championship.
Yeah.
And Major Impact 4 was the Trocadero Entertainment Center, where you had versed Maverick Summers.
Yeah, I retired him that night.
Right, okay.
Yeah, and then I retired his partner. I think me and BJ retired. Maybe we retired both of them. They were good kids. Flippy
Now, was there any stories coming out of that show? Because a lot of the guys from yesteryear bring up the Trocadero show.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was sitting out in the crowd. I used to like sitting out in the crowd before the show, and it was an opportunity to see how things look, obviously, as one of the owners of the business, and just sort of see how it's all presenting and what's going on, what could be done better, but also seeing what parts of the crowd are reacting, because it's very important for me, and I think it should be important for other people, is before you go out and do your match, ask the people before you, which part of the venue is responding, If you're going to go out there and work the left-hand side of the room and they're all quiet, but the right-hand side of the room are popping, it doesn't make sense, does it? So I was sitting out there, front of the ring, right at the back, watching the show, and there was this goose. He was next to us, and he was going on and on how he could do this and he could do that, and if he was in the ring, and I'm just thinking, I'm going to lose it at this fella. And I was just getting more and more and more worked up, and I went out there, out to the change room, and I feel like I was talking to Scorn or something like that. And yeah, I was just like, I'm going to just let this guy have it. And one of the key things about that Trocadero venue was it was an over 18.
Right. So a lot of people were drinking at this show.
Yeah, she was an over 18 venue, and obviously, therefore, the use of profanity was accepted. Not that I ever really let that as a boundary, should have in hindsight. But and I thought, nah, I'm letting this guy go, and I got on the mic and I just unleashed. I felt a lot better, to be honest, for doing it. But he just shrunk into his seat. I think he actually ended up leaving. I told him I'd be out in the car park waiting for him after the show. I was just so incensed.
So you went out as Cruz and just targeted him, telling him to pretty much shut his mouth.
I cut a promo before my match, I believe.
Yeah.
And I just told this guy I was going to kill him. And I literally wanted to kill the guy. He just done my head in that much, you know. A lot of us think we can do things in life, but really can't. And it's, you know, there's times to do things and there's time to appreciate when other people can do things and just go, hey, this is cool, you know.
Yeah.
Well, hey, this is shit. You know, make your own decisions, but don't sit there and be a pork chop.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just told him what I thought, I suppose, in my own, you know what I'm like.
Yes.
I think he just wound me up a little bit too far, and therefore I just really went. And I don't think Dad was that impressed, which nor should he. But you know, these things happen.
Yeah, you got caught in the heat of the moment, and that guy was obviously just running his mouth a bit too much.
Yeah, true story.
Wow. Okay, because a lot of the guys. Yeah, a lot of the guys bring up that show, and they've all got individual stories surrounding Trocadero. I'm not sure if it was that show, but definitely that venue. But it was around this time because, as I mentioned just before, at Major Impact 3, you and the Sweet Assassin fought for the South Pacific Championship. Now, I touched on this in a couple of episodes where the concept was created of the South Pacific Championship, where it was a title that would be defended in IPW New Zealand and what was to become IPW Australia, which was what the company would be after Major Impact. But before that, you would obviously have to develop and have that relationship with New Zealand. Now, you were one of the first guys to make that initial New Zealand trip for an event called, I think it was Rival Turf.
Rival Turf, that was fun. I really enjoyed that.
How long into the business now are you when the opportunity goes, hey, you know, let's go to New Zealand and let's do some business over there?
Yeah, you know, I always try and remember if Rival Turf was just before I then went on to the US. I don't know if that was that show or so as a timeline, mate. I showed someone that match not long ago because I just wanted them to experience that chair spot.
Yeah.
I don't know how I actually can still walk after that, but man, that was cool. But yeah, I'm not sure how far in that was, but I remember it's actually really nice because I pulled that up on YouTube the other day to show one of the boys that I was speaking to, and it's one of those. It was really nice to see Dad, you know, in a video. You know, I've got all these photos of Dad and things like that as memories, but it was really cool to see him and. Yeah, he cut a really cool promo during that show, and then him running around with JC Ace around the ring, just going to town on each other. That was pretty neat. But that, you know, that's where you really saw how he works a crowd and makes things look good. But no, it was a really cool memory. I really enjoyed that. You know, working that match with Chuck, setting his head on fire was always fun.
So as you said, that match is on. Is that the same match where you set? Is that the one on YouTube?
Yeah. Or I stapled. I feel like it must have been right before we went to the US because we worked that same finish for a match in Toronto with a company called UWA Hardcore Wrestling. I think they're called. That was really cool. So I feel like it must have been just before then, which I got a really cool story from over there. But yeah, that's when that match must have been just before then. So that was, I think, 2004-ish.
Okay.
From memory.
Yep.
Yeah. Must have been around there.
So the concept was, were you one of the key figures co-running the wrestling with Hawk at the time, or were you just still helping out?
Back then it was definitely me and Dad.
Okay.
The only time I sort of stepped away from the wrestling a little bit more once it a little while into it, going into the William Duncan school. So right up until then, I was really heavily involved with it.
Okay.
I stepped away from it a little bit after then because I just needed a rest.
Right. So did you help orchestrate the dealing with New Zealand to get you guys over there, or was that something that Hawk could have did on his own?
I think we did it as a team, you know, because we had a great relationship with Chuck, the Machine, and you know, Johnny King. So Chuck was running it back then. I think he had some partnerships, but he was the key person we always dealt with. And I think he was very much always open to, running, doing certain conglomerations and things like that. He very much respected Dad. They got along amazingly. And so I think for both Dad and Chuck, it made sense to make that partnership happen in one way or another. And then, I can't remember why we separated from Major Impact Wrestling to become IPW Australia, if it sort of happened back then. But it was probably a big thing between myself, Dad, and Chuck, was sort of the big conversations creating that.
So that's where the idea of the championship known as the South Pacific concept came up?
Yeah, exactly. So utilizing, some talent, because it's always great to have, different talent in the room. It doesn't have to be Hulk Hogan turning up to a match. It just has to be something different for a crowd to experience. And I think promoters will be able to tell you this firsthand, that you could bring Diamond Dallas Page, or you could bring our mate down in WA, Total Goose. What was his name? Billy the Goose.
Oh, yeah. Kip Sop.
Yeah, he was amazing, wasn't he? But you can bring people like that to a show, or you could bring Johnny King to a show, and there might be 5 more people turn up to see Billy Gunn. And it's not so much about who you're bringing, it's bringing someone different so that it doesn't get stale. And I think that concept of creating the South Pacific Championship and working in with IPW New Zealand was to keep things, progressive and to put new talent in front of the crowds, because it doesn't matter how many times you work with another wrestler or the different combinations or the different moves. Ultimately, that character is in front of the crowd over and over again. So it's nice to give them someone different to look at and someone different to cheer or boo. And hence why that came about with that South Pacific. It was a benefit to both IPW Australia or Major Impact Wrestling, whatever it was called back then, and a benefit to the guys in New Zealand as well for their show.
Because I still remember that being an active title when I signed up in 2008. There was the talk of, hey, we're bringing this guy over, you're gonna win, but hey, in next month at this date, you've got to go over there and defend it. And
yes,
and it was such a unique concept at the time, because as most wrestling fans would know, there is a title in the WWE known as the Intercontinental Championship, but although WWE travels all around the world, this was the first localized version I'd seen where an international championship was being defended almost on a monthly basis.
Yeah, I think it came down to, look, at the end of the day, I think from what I can remember, everyone traveled on their own wallet, and hence, that is professional wrestling. And unless you're the WWE, you pay your own way and you do it because you love it. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to do it. Right. So guys would pull money out of their own pocket to fly to New Zealand or fly to Australia. You give them a good feed or something when they get here, but that's about as financially beneficial as it was. But it was really good for people to go and be able to wrestle somewhere else, because as you remember back then, Dad was very protective about our wrestlers wrestling with other companies, and it wasn't because he wanted guys to not wrestle with them, but we can't control, or he couldn't control, he or we, what was then done with those wrestlers. Now, if you build up a wrestler within your business and they had a certain status or a storyline, well, for them to then go and work with another company, A, B, or C, whether it was Sydney, Melbourne, Perth, wherever, you had no control over what they did with that character. Ultimately, it would be up to the character who was traveling to go, yes, I will do that. No, I won't. Hence what you found out with me when we went to Perth, what I wasn't prepared to do. So that was fun. So the idea of creating that South Pacific was it gave each company, New Zealand and Australia, the opportunity to have some control over what was done on each side of the ditch, rather than just go, hey, go and wrestle for someone and let them degrade your character that we've been building up for 6 or 8 months. No, go and wrestle over there, and there was some sort of control over that content, So that's the good thing about that title.
Yeah, I always loved the appeal of that belt, and even the design of it. It was, I think it had like an opal in the centerpiece.
Yeah, I feel like it actually even got rebranded to the heavyweight championship at one point because it was a nice belt.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I feel like it rings a bell. Like it was a big, heavy belt.
Yeah, it was.
And I actually feel like at one point the South Pacific became the heavyweight title belt. Obviously not anymore, but I feel like that rings a bell for me because it was such a nice looking belt.
Well, speaking on traveling internationally, it was at this point you just brought up before. After doing Rival Turf, you guys then go, "Hey, we're going to hit the US." How did that come about, and who'd you take with you, and how was that experience?
Yeah, so that all came about originally. We had Steve Carino, C.W. Anderson. So back then, I was actively speaking to a lady called Stacey Brickle, who was based out of Long Island in New York. She was I think she ran a company called, I don't know, Extreme Promotions or something like that, rings a bell. Anyway, so I would speak to her about bringing talent in from the US for our major impact shows. At one point we had looked at Abdullah the Butcher and King Kong Bundy and all sorts of bloody things. But we ended up a show with C.W. Anderson and Steve Carino. And after, I think that show I did was when I wrestled BJ in the TLC, when I come off the top of that ladder to the outside. Stupid idea. Glad it worked. That could have gone bad. But so we'd spoken to them, and basically after talking to them for a while, Carino said, "Hey, I'd love to have you over in the US, work for some of my places in Philly. I can do, New Jersey for you, all this sort of stuff." So that sort of started there, and I thought, okay, well, that's awesome. And I built the trip. I pretty well, it ended up myself, Dad, Chuck, the Machine, and Jace the Ace. But I created this whole itinerary that was going to be about 4 or 5 months long. So, that eventuated from there. Ultimately, Carino turned out to be a total jerk, really screwed us over once we got there. But we still managed to get a few shows in and a few opportunities popped up. But that was a really cool that was a cool trip. But ultimately set up as a result of having some of the guys from the US here.
Right. Okay. So you guys invited the guys over. I think it was Major Impact 1 where those guys had come in.
Yeah, I think that might have been the original sort of super show that we did, where we decided we needed talent. Funny story from that. Geez, I remember this. I was living in a high rise in Surface. I had another partner back then, and I'd sit up talking, and as much as I knew about wrestling, I still had a lot to learn about life and communication. And
right.
I'm talking, and so Steve Carino, the king of hardcore, does this, does that, ECW, and I'm talking to this guy like a total idiot. I'm on, chatting to him, chainsaws. I'm just joking, but of course this guy's a professional wrestler. Yes, he's a jerk, but he's a professional wrestler, and it's his life, it's his business. And here I am, this young fella. So, no, we can do this and we can get you blood and gore and da-da-da. And he's like, okay, you're unprofessional, I'm not coming. I'm thinking, shit, what have I done? Like I've just ruined this. This is the base of our event. Steve Carino versus C.W. Anderson. All these people coming to watch that. We've promoted the shit, and I've just basically, I've turned it into, no, he's not coming. He's coming to this half-assed company because there's this young fella going on like a pork chop. So I really had to backtrack on that. Sorry, all sorted. But I nearly screwed that up big time.
Wow.
Maybe that's what screwed me over when we came over there. Who knows? He might have had it in the back of his mind.
Well, it's one story that is still in the back of my mind that I remember hearing about you guys going over to the United States. Was there an incident? And I need you to clarify this story because I've only heard snippets of it. I don't know the full detail, but I remember I think it was just a term of passing, maybe overhearing it, Hawk sort of relaying a snippet. I think he said something along the lines of, "Well, thank God you weren't in the US when I ripped up that script." Was there a situation in the locker room or something that happened where this came about?
No, look, there was a situation in Toronto where there's a little dark wrestler, a lovely lad, and he was just sitting there at the back in the change room reading like this 3 or 4 page script that someone had written for him, and he was just wigging out. And as he should have, some goose has said, here, this is our match, start to finish, And this guy's like, how am I going to remember this, And I think, Dad might have grabbed it and torn it up for him or something. But it was, this poor little bloke was so stressed out about what he was going to go out there and do in his match. And Dad's just like, mate, you don't need to do any of this. You just need to go out there and work a match for this crowd. See, I guess what people don't realize, and when it comes to a match, the more you plan, the less you can do, because ultimately, you got to go out there and remember that whole match, start to finish. Yeah. And if you don't remember one part of that match, well, you're going to try and go back to it at some point, or you're just going to go, shit, where do I go next? But the crowd doesn't like it. What do you do? Where do you go next? I have to do this next thing, which is coincidentally part of what they didn't like in the first place. So your whole match is going to be shit. You go out there and start doing a match that's just holds or just bumps. You don't know how the crowd are going to react to that. So this little fella was ultimately so caught up in what he had to do in this match, when at the end of the day, it's not what he needed to do anyway. He just needed to go out there and wrestle and work with the crowd. So I think Dad might have. I think Dad grabbed it off him or something like that. It was that was interesting. He's probably thinking, "What the hell is this guy doing?"
Here are these Australians coming in and tearing up scripts and.
And then we go out there, and next minute, here he is smashing my manager in the head with a letterbox and bleeding everywhere. Well, I'm setting a guy's head on fire.
Welcome to wrestling. So was that your first international trip besides from New Zealand?
Yes.
Was that your first time in the States?
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Was it a bit of a culture shock?
The big thing was, I guess you're younger, you go into the US, all you know of America is the movies. Now, I've been to America now 16, 17 times. I can't even remember how many times I've been to the US now.
Right.
So to me now, it's just like going down to the shop to get a carton of milk. That's sort of America to me. But the first time you go there, it's like all you think of is, the movies. What's this? What's that? Rodeo Drive or Venice Beach or Cops. You know what I mean? Like that's what you see. So you're flying into Los Angeles and you just see the city, thinking, how cool is this? This is amazing. And I'm going to go and work in the US, wrestle in the US. Trying to sneak by customs without letting them see your mask, because I'm not really supposed to be wrestling in the US without telling them. So it is a culture shock in that regard, because I guess back then too, and having done it, you don't realize how easy it is to do. Now, right. It's a status for people to go, hey, I wrestled in America. So what? Anyone can go and do it. Or you shoot a promoter an email, they'd love to have you there. You've wrestled in the US. What have you done in the US ultimately? So it's a culture shock in that you're in America. It's a foreign place. You've seen it in the movies. You go and do a show. The beauty is you're working with a different crowd and a different audience, and maybe they're reacting to your accent. Keeping in mind this was, 16 odd years ago, I think, when we wrestled there. It was, the cost to go to America was a lot different than what it is now. So some of those locations where we were wrestling, not necessarily mainstream locations, people are responding to you a lot differently too, to your accent, to just you as a person, and want to know about your culture. So it was a shock in that we're in a foreign place that we see on the movies. This is neat. It was different in terms of working with a different crowd, and I had the opportunity to go to dinner and work with Hammer Valentine and George Animal Steel and Tony Atlas and all those guys. So that was really cool to experience that in conversation and hear their stories and talk about their life. But at the end of the day, it's just another wrestling show with just another audience, and you just go out there and do exactly what you do. It's no different to wrestling at your local venue. It's really just the adventure of that little bit of traveling around and the people you meet more than anything.
All right, you guys, I've got to hit the pause button right there with Cruz. I know just getting into the good stuff. Thanks for listening to this long episode. Don't worry, part 2 with Cruz will be out next week. While I got you here, make sure you hit up the socials at LMBC Podcast on Facebook and Instagram, and at LMBC_podcast on Twitter. Thanks so much for tuning in. Part 2 next week with Cruz. I'll see you next week.